Hey guys, welcome to the channel. If you are new here, my name is Dave. I do tech reviews, and last week I did an in-depth breakdown review of the M3 MacBook Air compared to my M1 MacBook Pro that I picked up a year and a half ago for this YouTube thing, taking this more seriously, and also for my clinical work as a therapist. And it wasn't intended to be like a direct comparison review, but it was more to give you guys a contextual understanding of being able to get, say, an M1 MacBook Pro in 2024, right, at near and around the same price as you can with an M3 MacBook Air, right, if you're really bumping up a lot of the specs there. The results are interesting, and honestly, the M1 MacBook Pro does literally everything that I needed to do on a day-to-day basis. To be perfectly honest with you guys, when I last got my hands on an M1 MacBook Air, that did literally everything that I needed, maybe just shy of like the heavy video editing stuff for things here on the channel. So going into comparing the M2 and M3, I was a little skeptical, but here we are. But today we have the M2 MacBook Air in that starlight color against the M3 MacBook Air. And I always look at tech specifically through the lens of how it impacts one's personal lifestyle. I did run tests, and so I'm going to give you straight and away, and I'll waste you guys' time. The read and write speeds for the M3 MacBook Air are higher than on the M2, but in practical everyday usage for me personally, like when I'm transferring large files from my Sony a7 IV camera to my MacBook, or from SSD to my MacBook and vice versa, in practical usage, I found that to honestly be largely the same, where the M3 MacBook Air was maybe a few seconds faster in terms of transferring data. When it comes to the Wi-Fi download speeds, this does have a newer Wi-Fi chip, and the MacBook Air does come in a bit faster, but in practical usage, right, downloading, say, apps from the App Store, different applications and files, I found that to also be largely the same, like practical usage. And it came to actually using both of these to edit video files, which is like a large majority of what I use my M1 MacBook Pro for on a day-to-day basis. These largely performed similarly both in the timeline and when exporting. I will say that the M3 MacBook Pro did export the same video file as in last week's video against the M1 Pro, about 12 to 13 seconds faster than on the M2. But again, practically looking at real world usage, how much of a difference does it actually make, right? And in the timeline, looking at applying different LUTs, different transitions and effects, manipulating the different clips and moving them around, I can say too that they were largely similar. That being said, the M3 was maybe a little bit smoother, maybe hitched a little bit less than the M2, but again, practically speaking, right, if I toggle the performance mode on in Final Cut Pro for the timeline, they perform pretty darn similarly. And so who the heck is this M3 MacBook Air for, right? Especially if you're looking to come from, say, like an older MacBook. Why would I dish out the extra $100 to, say, $2 or $3 if you're really wanting to bump up the spec on the M3 than over on the M2? Or if, say, you're looking to jump in for the very first time, and there is one specific instance that I can think of, well, actually two reasons of why you might want to make that move. Looking at size profile, it's the same. When looking at the ports, it's the same. You're getting the lightning port, you're getting the two USB-C ports and the headphone jack, so that's the same. You are getting that improved anodized cover here. I have this midnight color. I think this looks beautiful. For me, as someone who has more oily skin, I still see the smudges. You guys might also see the smudges. Or say like on the Starlight, that's not really something I've had a problem with. On the midnight though, I definitely see it. Maybe it's an improvement, I don't know. Now I could definitely do this test in like a perfect studio lighting situation, but most people don't have that accessible, so I'm here in my living room, just one natural living room light and some lighting coming from the windows. And I mean, I think they look largely the same, if I'm being honest. That being said, there's better voice isolation for sure over here on the M3 MacBook Air. Whether that's a big deal for you guys is definitely going to be up to you, but visually, looks basically the same. Looking at battery life, both of them still last me several days on end without having to really worry about charging it, especially if I'm doing a lot of the normal everyday things that someone might be doing. If I'm typing up, say, like clientele notes using that software, or if I'm working on my spreadsheets, researching things, maybe watching some videos, largely the same. I do feel like I get an extra hour to 2 hours worth out of the M3 MacBook Air over the M2, and when using both of these outside, the screen experience is the same because you're getting the same peak brightness. The screens are both very crisp and detailed and clear. clear. If you guys are new here to the channel and enjoying the video, I have a goal this year of hitting 50,000 subscribers by the end of the year, so I can work towards being a full-time content creator. I love this YouTube thing. I love making content. So if you're enjoying the video, want to see more, hit the subscribe button so you can stay up to date, and a thumbs up does go a long way to helping me out. But back to your video. So my previous MacBook Air video, a lot of people asked me if the keyboard for that one was different than on like the other ones. I can confidently say between the M2 and the M3, the travel, the keys, the clickiness, the way everything functions feels literally identical. The frames of the body are identical. They weigh the same exact weight. And in terms of the speakers, well, I'll let you listen for yourself. You ask me, I think in terms of like the bassiness, the way that they hit the mediums and the highs sound pretty much the same. I mean, there might be a difference, but I think for most consumers, even if you were to go with last year's model, the M2, you're getting a great sounding speaker system on that one also. And so for me, thinking of like if I were a viewer watching this video and I'm really looking for the definitive thing that I think might push me over the edge to purchase the M3 MacBook Air over the M2, and I think that would be dual monitor support, which me personally, I don't use a lot. I have my ultra-wide screen back here that I use for everything from video editing to my web browsing. And I just have my MacBook open as a smaller display in front of me. For me, that personally suffices. So if that's something that you don't absolutely need, then the M3 might be a little bit of overkill in that way. Could you argue that it's better to have it than to not have it? It's really going to depend on like your own personal life use case. I don't do gaming on my MacBook Pro, even though I've had that for a long time because I have a PlayStation 5, I have my Asus ROG Ally, play on the Legion Go, and so that's where I do my gaming at. But the M3 has dynamic caching, hardware accelerated ray tracing, and hardware accelerated mesh shading. And I'm not one of those super in-depth, super techie breakdown channels, but if you're wondering what dynamic caching does, that's important because it essentially allows for the M3 to utilize the exact amount of memory needed for each individual tasks, which is great for, say, like your web browsing, but it's also really useful in gaming scenarios. But ultimately, I personally think the only real world practical reason that you would pick up the M3 is if you want that extra gaming performance and gaming power out of your MacBook. Outside of that, for pretty much literally everything that you would want out of your MacBook, the M2 does just as well. And if I'm being honest, using the M1 MacBook Air, that does a lot of what you would need on a day-to-day basis perfectly fine too, so you'd save yourself even more money going with the M1. Apple more than likely does not want me telling you that. They don't know that I even exist, but I have to be honest with you guys. Like when I used the M1 MacBook Air, it did literally everything that I needed on a day-to-day basis. And that's just the fact of it. Thank you guys so much again for stopping by and hanging out. I wish you a fantastic remainder of your day, afternoon, or night, depending on the time as you're watching this. And as always, peace, love, and adios. Bye guys, and have a great day. Bye.